Good day, my name is Dave Glover. Today I'm going to walk you through how to prepare security analytics to receive file-based logs from devices that we do not currently support. In my example, I have two different log files that I'll be sending in. Informix database logs, so if we take a look at those, pretty simple, pipe delimited. The other ones are Untangle web logs. If we take a look at those, looks like we have a date, time, sequence number, an IP address, and then an action, and then the rest of the logs. Now, in order to send these into security analytics, we would need to go ahead and configure the system to receive these logs. So if we go ahead and log in here, then we go ahead to Log Collector, View, Config. Typically, when setting up file-based event sources, click on Event Source, click on File, add a new category, and what we would like to see is a selection for Informix. So scroll down here and we see that there's none here. We would then also want to configure our Untangle web logs. Again, neither here. What we're going to walk through is how to get additional entries into this list. These are nothing more than file specs, as we call them. If you win SCP into Etsy, NetWitness, NG, Log Collection, Content, Collection, File on a log collector, you will see these list of files or list of XMLs. This list of XMLs is directly related to what we see in this list here. Now, there is no generic file reader config, so therefore we need to build one. The first step involves taking one that is already here and opening it up and taking a look at what's being done so that we can choose to modify it. Let's go ahead and open up the SAP XML so we can see exactly what's going on. We see that we have a name, file type, the pretty name, the version, the author, and then a description. The key pieces to this file are file SAP, the processor type of generic, the data start line, the field delimiter, the ID field, and then the line delimiter. Then the prefix tag, and then replace delimiter, prefix, file name, multiple delimiters treated one, and then replace file delimiter. If we wanted to modify this and recreate it to work with the two different types of log files that we want to send in, the first thing we want to do is copy this SAP XML over to our working directory. Once we have that copied over, we can then navigate to that directory, and we'll see that we have sap.xml. First off, let's go ahead and change this name to something that's more relevant for what we're doing. The first one we'll do here, we'll do our Untangle web logs. So I'll change this to Untangle. Now obviously we need to modify the contents of this file to make it relevant. Let's first go back to the Untangle web logs and take a look at what we have. So again, we have date, time. Actually, I'm sorry, we have date, a space, time, space, value, space, IP address, space. This looks like an action. What I would like to do is I'd like to prepend these log files with a identifier and then the action to make it much easier to parse. So if we go ahead and open up this Untangle XML, the first thing that I might want to do is change all the SAP or SAP references to Untangle. Easiest way to do that is just search replace. We're going to change SAP to Untangle. Replace all. Now I need to change the text here as well. File collection specification for event source type Untangle. We'll just leave that. It's good enough. Using file handler Untangle, which is just fine. So I want to do file.untangle, processor type generic, data start line. If we take a look at what data start line means, where from the top down does it start reading log files? The reason why you would choose something other than 1 would be if there's a header. If there was a header at the top of this that would denote what the fields are, such as source IP address, destination IP address, and others, then we would probably choose to start at line 2. But in this case, because the logs have no headers, we can start at line 1. If you choose and do not change that to line 1, on every file that gets transferred, you would ignore the number of lines prior to the start line. So we want to make sure that we do choose that appropriately. There also is no harm in choosing 1 even if there is a header, just realizing that the header will come into the security analytics as an unparsed message. So let's go back. What's the field delimiter? The field delimiter here is a space in the log files. We need to change this field delimiter to a space. When you have a space delimiter, you actually have to put in the hex values for that as 0x20. If it was a comma, a pipe, a semicolon, a quote, you can just put those values directly in there. Space is a little bit different. Now the ID field is what do we want to grab from the log file and put into the header. So as we stated, my preference would be to use this action as TCP miss. So if we look at how far over that's located, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. It's the 5th location if we use space as delimiters. So we would change the ID field to 5. The line delimiter, we can just leave a /n. The transform prefix tag is untangle, and I'll show you how this lines up with the log files. So an untangle, transform, replace delimiter 0, prefix, file name 0, multiple delimiters 1, 0, and then the replace as 0. So that's all fine. Now what we would do is we'll go ahead and save this. Once we save it, then let us transfer that over to this same directory. And again, that's etc netwitness ng log collection content collection file. And we see that we have moved over the untangle file. It's right here. While we're here, let me just show you one other directory here that's of interest as well. If you are collecting logs via ODBC and you had a custom ODBC source, much like the file directory, there are ODBC statements for each of the log collections that we'll do via file reader. And if we were to take a look at a sample of that, let's just look at this What's Up Gold user activity. Take a look at this. See the same type of tag. We see the delimiter, much the same way as a file, except in ODBC we'll have a select data query. So this is the selecting of what columns we're going to retrieve back. Okay, let's go back into my file. We have my untangle there. The next thing that we're going to want to do is to restart the NW log collector service. Let's putty in to the log decoder. Restart NW log collector. And that will go through, shut down the log collector, restart it, and it will now read in those configuration XML files from the collection file. So let's give this a moment to restart. So now that that's started, we should be able to see a new untangle session or untangle file reader definition in the event source config. So if we click on plus, let's scroll down, and there we have it. Now we have untangle. I would then go ahead and configure that, add in my source, untangle server. What is the IP address? This IP address is the IP address of the source device. Whatever you put in here is what will populate device.ip. So we need to make sure we appropriately put in the address that's reflective of where the logs are coming from. Once we go ahead and create this, what's going to happen here is it will create a new directory under, so that'll create a new directory under the log decoder or log collector. Let's take a look at where that directory exists. If we go back and we go to var netwitness log collector upload untangle server. So this is where the files would be SFTP'd. If you'd like to test, you can simply take the log files, put them into this directory, or at least the untangle ones, and it'll go ahead and process, collect, and append on the headers onto the log files. So let's take a look at what that file reader service is actually doing to the log file. If we go back to the untangle log, essentially what's happening is it is transforming these files and adding on a piece of header. It's adding on untangle -4 -tcp underscore miss : and then the rest of the message. So the untangle here comes from, in the untangle XML, we saw that we had a data prefix tag. So the untangle here, that is what's driving this. The -4 is a level, nothing you can really do to change that, it's irrelevant as well. And then we also saw that we said, hey, the identification field is field 5. So what we're going to do, or the file reader will do, is it'll count over 5 values, grab this, and move it to the header. So much the same way, this other log file with this TCP refresh miss will look like untangle -4 TCP refresh miss. Once you've configured this file and you've fed the logs into Security Analytics, only then can you actually export them to build the parser against. We have not built a parser. All we have done is told Security Analytics how to process those files once it retrieves them. If we wanted to take a look at how this has now been processed by Security Analytics, we can simply jump into Investigator. And remember, I had put 1234 as the device IP. Go right in here, we see the 6 logs. Right-click on these and take a look at them in log view. And then we have the logs here. We see the %untangle -4 -tcp miss. Only once it's received here and processed through the file reader will we actually go and export the logs. Once the logs are exported, only then can we build a parser against those logs. So we can see here, again, same thing. And then we build a parser. The mistake I find that people make is they actually try to build the parsers against the raw logs, the logs that have not been processed through the file reader service. So what happens here is when they build a parser against these messages here, and then they build the file spec and then add on the beginning pieces, the logs will no longer parse as they have extra information in front of them. So that's built in the file reader spec for something simple like a log file like this, where we have a identification field right in here. What if we wanted to build the same type of XML for this file? Now in this case, there's really not a identifier that we could use. So in that case, we probably want to run without an identifier. So let's go ahead and do the same thing that we did with that XML file. So first thing, we want to just copy it, only because we don't want to touch that untangle one. We want to rename it. So let's rename it informix.xml. Do not confuse these XMLs with the parser XMLs. They are different. So typically what I'll do is I'll do an informix-file.xml and then an informix.msg.xml to represent the two different ones. So if I go ahead now and open this up, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to search replace. We're going to change untangle, or whatever it was in the file reader spec that you took, and we're going to replace this with Informix. Replace all, same type of deal. Now in this case, because there's no identifier, there's nothing that I can really do here. The field delimiter is also not important. However, it is a pipe. You can put that. It really doesn't matter. The transform prefix tag, we'll leave that as Informix. So we'll go ahead and save this, and we're going to do exactly the same deal. We're going to go back to Etsy, NetWitness, NG, log collection, content, collection, file, and I'm going to copy over my Informix.xml. We'll do the same thing. We'll restart the log collector, create a file reader definition for that using the Informix file reader. What we will end up with now, if we were to pass this through, and it would be exactly the same procedure, is we would have Informix -4 : because we did not put an identifier in there, the system won't add any identifiers in other than the Informix -4 : Again, this is what you would build your file reader against. Now, one question I get asked a bit is what happened when I saw something like this. Informix, actually I apologize, untangle -4 content unknown, or something along those lines. What happened with that was that the ID that you picked, so let's go back to the untangle XML for a moment. If you had picked ID 14, for example, and 14 did not exist, or placeholder 14 did not exist, it would give invalid content, or something along those lines. But that was caused by this ID field not being present in the actual log file. So that's something to look at. Or if this untangle XML put a delimiter as double pipe, for example, and you see the double pipe does not exist anywhere in here, it doesn't know how to walk over to position 14 to build the header. So therefore you'll get invalid content, invalid context, unknown content, something along those lines. Well, I hope that that was useful and you understood and were able to follow through what we were able to do to be able to build a file spec to allow security analytics to collect log files that we do not support. Thank you very much.